Hello, and welcome back to One Piece of Insight, where we use analysis to help you achieve your TCG collecting goals. In today's video, we're going to be looking at what I think are going to be the 30 most iconic cards 5 years from now. So, looking forward into the future, what are people who are going to be collecting the One Piece TCG 5 years ago going to think are the most iconic cards from this period? And I'm limiting this to cards that can be had for around $1,000 or less, so that it doesn't devolve into just a conversation about mangas and the gold SPs and things like that these conversations often around. So with that, let's jump right into the tier list. Okay, so first up, we have the Super Pre-Release Luffy. I do think this card is going to be considered iconic because it was essentially the first Luffy leader that wasn't from OPO1. But I also think the art is pretty meh, so we're going to put it here in the 25 to 30 range. I did try to put this in relatively chronological order, so that's how we're going to go through the cards. Next up, we have the Luffy leader from OPO1. I think that this is one of the absolute most iconic cards ever made, full stop, regardless of value. I think some people refer to this as the, Charizard, the base set Charizard, which I think is totally fair. Obviously, if we're talking about less than $1,000, we're talking about the post-errata version, not the pre-errata version. But even still, I think this is going to be one of the most iconic cards of all time. Next, we have the Zoro leader, and while I don't think the Zoro leader card is as iconic as the Luffy, I think it's up there. I think this is an absolutely incredible piece of art. I think it captures Zoro's grumpiness perfectly, and I think we haven't seen anything else like it yet in the card game, and so for that reason, I think it's going to be regarded as iconic 5 years from now. Also, I think there's a premium in general for things that come from the first set. Next up, we have the Law alt art leader. Similar argument to the other two, except the Law is a little bit less popular, or a lot less popular. So we're going to put him in the 25 to 30 range, but I think we're still going to put it ahead of the super pre-released Luffy. Now, one that may surprise folks how high I have on the list is the OPO1 alt art Luffy. I think that this art is fire, literally. I think that it's the first alt art Luffy that isn't a leader, and I think for that reason, it's going to be really iconic. I also can't speak for anybody else, but I know that, whenever I go to a card shop and they have sort of like the posters from OPO1, like this is the image that I see. And so for me, this is like one of the most important cards, in the early parts of the set. And so for that reason, I'm putting it in the 13 through 18 ranking list. Next up, again, we have one that might surprise some people. This is the Akira Agawa Luffy alt from OPO2. I actually think that this card is going to be regarded as pretty iconic 5 years from now, even though it's, quite inexpensive at this point by the standards of a One Piece card. And here's my logic. So Akira Agawa is a very famous artist for drawing Pokemon cards, also very famous for for doing illustrations for One Piece cards. But if 5 years from now this game continues to grow, we have to think about where those people are going to be coming from. A lot of them are going to be coming from Pokemon, where they will know Akira Agawa's art. And so that may make this card more iconic because those folks will want to collect it because they know of her artwork already and will want to add it to their Pokemon collection of her artwork. And so for that reason, I actually think that as the game continues to grow, this card is likely to be viewed as more iconic. I also think the art is absolutely sick. I'm a big Akira Agawa fan, so that could just be my bias. But that's where I think this is headed. All right, next up, we have OPO3. We have the Nami alt art leader. Where should we put this one? I think we're going to put this in the 19 to 24 category. While I think that a lot of people might disagree on how much they like this art, I think that the orange really pops off the white background. I think if you've seen it in person, the foiling is really cool. It's a really cool effect, and it's very striking. I think you'll also notice a trend in this ranking, which is that things that are sort of unique or stand out among the crowd, I'm more likely to rank more highly because I think that those are the ones that when you're looking at all of the cards that have been presented will really sort of stand out as being different, and that will make them iconic. Also, this being the first Nami leader card, I think adds to the iconic nature of it. And so for that reason, I'm putting it in the 19 to 24 range. Next up, we have the OPO3 Wanted Luffy, Luffy Wanted poster. I know this is a card that a lot of people disagree about. A lot of people don't like the red. They hate that it's in color. They like the much more authentic black and white Wanted posters, which I get. But I think the red works a lot better than the other colors. So like as opposed to the green kid, which doesn't really make much sense. The red, to me, works okay on this. But ultimately, like, it's one of the first SPs ever printed. It's the first Luffy Wanted poster ever printed. And so for that reason, I think it is going to be an iconic card, even if it's not people's absolute favorite artwork. So I'm slotting it behind the OPO1 alt art in the 13 to 18. All right, next up, in my opinion, is a heavy hitter. We have the Boa SP from OPO4. In my opinion, this is going to be one of the most iconic cards of all time. I think that the artwork on this is incredibly striking. I think it's super different from what we've seen in other sets. And every time I look at it, frankly, I like it more and more. And I think part of the reason is because when I first got into One Piece, I was really impressed by all the incredibly busy cards. They had really elaborate foiling and there was a lot going on. And so I didn't care as much about the cards that were sort of less crazy looking. But as I've gotten more into it and looked at more cards and spent more time with the cards, I've really grown to appreciate some of the cards that are a little bit cleaner, a little bit simpler, but still have amazing detail and foiling in the background. I also like that this is a image of Boa that's very different from the other types that we've gotten in other cards. And so I think for that reason, when people are looking at the whole catalog of cards, this one will really stand out and feel different in a way that makes it really iconic. So I'm going to put that in the top 6. Next up, we have the Santa Chopper from the Holiday Gift Collection 2023. I'm going to put this one, I'm just kidding, but I'm going to put this one in the sleeper pick category because while I don't think this is going to be one of the 30 most iconic cards, I do think that this card is really hilarious. People like Chopper, especially when Chopper's doing cute things. And I think this card does have potential to sort of stand the test of time as a fan favorite. And so while I don't think it's in the top 30 for that reason, I wanted to highlight it here as something that I think has the potential to be surprisingly iconic in the future. Next up is one that I think most people will agree is pretty iconic, and that is the OPO5 Nami SP. OPO5 was the first time we ever got these sort of like complex foiled backgrounds that we've started to see in multiple sets since. Nami obviously is the most popular character from that set to get this treatment. And now that those boxes are going for over $1,000, I think that exposure to OPO5 in general is just going to be very iconic. And so for that reason, I'm putting this in the 13 through 18 category. I think it's one of the most iconic Nami cards that's been printed. Next up, we have the alternate art secret Gear 5 Luffy card. I think for the same reason, OPO5 being one of the greatest sets of all time, this being the art from the manga, the iconic Gear 5 pose on an interesting background. This card, while not being incredibly rare, is also not incredibly common, but it's common enough that a lot of people are going to know of it and feel like they can chase it. So I think this will prove to be one of the most iconic cards. Obviously not as iconic as the manga, but, as a second tier iconic card. Next up, we have another Chopper, and this is from the first anniversary collection. I absolutely love this card. This is one of my favorite cards that they've ever printed. But I'm going to put it in sleeper picks again because, Chopper doesn't have quite the same fan base as a lot of these other cards. But this is probably the most adorable card of Chopper ever printed. And I think this art is just absolutely fantastic. I think the more people who see this card, the more people who will really, really like it and want to have it in their collection. But I don't think it has as much exposure as a lot of these other cards. And so for that reason, I'm putting it in the sleeper picks. But would I be shocked if this card was, wildly expensive in the future or wildly popular? I would not. Next up from the same set, we have the Luffy from the first anniversary collection set. Although I actually like the Chopper more because it's Luffy, we're going to put it higher up on the list here. I do think that, with the origin of Bandai printmaking in Japan being sort of an evolution of a cultural history of the finest quality printmaking in the world in Japan, a callback to, the Japanese style woodblock prints that Japan is famous for the One Piece card game, I think is an absolutely iconic choice. And so while I think this card is relatively scarce and that may hurt its potential to be super iconic, I do think this will be an iconic card in the future. All right, moving on, we have the Buggy SP from OPO6. Okay, so I'm going to put this one in sleeper picks as well. Again, Buggy doesn't have the biggest fan base, but I do think that the art on this is an iconic piece of art. And I think it will be interesting to see as the game grows and as people who have less knowledge of One Piece come into the game, whether they just see the art, think it's super cool, and want to own it. And that sort of increases the iconic nature of the card. Again, without a real fan base, it's hard to put them in the top 30, but I think this is a really interesting card to watch over the next 5 years. Next up, we have the Nami from OP07. This is another one of my favorite pieces of art that they have done. Um, it was very tricky to decide where to put this between the OP05 Nami and the OP07 Nami. I actually prefer the artwork in the OP07. I think the image is really cool. The foiling of the fireworks is amazing. But I think coming from OP05, the first Nami is probably going to be a little bit more iconic. But depending on, people's preferences, whether they prefer sort of the really elaborate background foiling or more of sort of like the special illustration rare type cards with a scene, will determine which is more iconic, but I think they're fairly close together. Another sleeper pick I have here is the 2024 convention Luffy promo. This art is really interesting and is different from what we've seen in other sets. So I could see this becoming like a very popular piece of art in the future. Not too much to say about this one, but I think it's one to watch as it could become more iconic in the future. Next up, we have the PSA Luffy promo. This is one that a lot of people have. I think what makes this one cool is that it was the first card ever printed that had all of the Straw Hats on one card together. And so for that reason, I think that it is going to be viewed as an iconic card over time. I think the fact that it's a promo that a lot of exist will ensure that there's a lot of sort of trading and buying and selling of that over time, which will help it to become a more iconic card. And so while it's not one of my favorite cards of all time, I do think it deserves a spot on this list. So we're going to put it next to the first anniversary of Luffy. Next up, we have the Nami illustration box, volume 1. So I'm not going to go so far as to say that this is a top 30 card, as this card is, between $25 and $30. But I do think that this art is surprisingly iconic for a couple of reasons. The artist, Peach Momoko, I think is one of the most popular artists in the One Piece trading card game. What I'm about to say for Nami, you could make a similar argument for the Boa card from the Illustration Collection Volume 1 as well. I think this art stands out as being different from most of the types of art we've seen from Nami in the past. I think it's a really appealing piece of artwork. So I think for that reason, paired with the fact that it's actually not very rare and relatively inexpensive, could make it one of those types of cards that more people feel they can accessibly own. And so it becomes a very well-known card and it becomes an iconic card. So I think this is definitely a sleeper to watch because this card, even though it's not nearly as expensive as the others, has a lot of things going for it. All right, moving on, we have the OP09 Luffy Leader. So I know leader cards in general have not gotten as much love as some of the other cards, but I think this is an absolutely iconic pose. I think these zoomed in images of their faces really capture aspects of the characters that people are going to really enjoy. This being the Gear 5 Luffy is sort of a different take from what you get from the manga. In a way that I think is incredibly striking. So for that reason, I think this is going to end up being one of the more iconic leader cards of all time. And so we're going to slot it in the 7 through 12 range right next to the Zoro. Okay, the OP09 Boa SP was actually kind of a difficult one to rank for me. The reason is because obviously this has been the most popular, arguably the most popular Boa card tied with the OP04 SP for a while. But in OP14, they released a very similar style card, which to me makes it kind of fungible between the two. And I think it actually takes both of them down the list. So while I think this is still going to be an iconic card, it got bumped down a little bit because it is no longer as different and unique as it once was. Back to OP09 again, we have the Nami. We have the Nami in the similar style. I think Nami is probably a little bit more popular of a character than Boa, so I'm going to slot it slightly above in this category. But again, I think whether you like this style of artwork or whether you prefer the illustration style of artwork is really going to decide, is really going to determine which one that you prefer. But I think given where this card is right now, I think this will probably remain a pretty iconic card. From OPO9, we also have the Zoro SP. This, I think, is less iconic than the Boa and the Nami, but I still think is pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and put this one at the front of the 25 through 30. It's not my favorite Zoro artwork, but people seem to really like it, so we'll put it here. My number 2 pick for the most iconic cards currently that can be had under $1,000 is the OPO9 Gear 5 Wanted Luffy poster. I think Wanted posters are about the most iconic thing that the One Piece card game can make, and I think they absolutely nailed it with this one. The black and white image is fantastic. The Gear 5 photo image is fantastic. And this to me is sort of like the ultimate Luffy card that you want to have in your collection. So for me, between the OPO1 leader and the Gear 5 Wanted poster, these to me are the most iconic Luffys, that can be had for around $1,000 or less. And I think they're going to stand the test of time and only become more popular. Next up, we have the second anniversary collection Luffy. This is another one that has all of the Straw Hats together, which I think is really, really cool. It's also a really interesting and different style of artwork that has seen a lot of popularity growth lately. So I put it in a similar category as the first anniversary Luffy and the PSA Luffy. I think they're pretty similar, so we're going to group them together. Next up, we have a Newgate SP from Royal Blood, I believe. And I'm going to go ahead and slot this at the back of the 25 to 30 range. I think the art on this is really, really fun. I think the fact that you have, all the Whitebeard pirates is really, really cool. And it's just different from a lot of the other things that are out there. But, Newgate isn't as popular as a lot of others, so we're going to slide this all the way to the back of the top 30. All right, next up on what I consider to be the super iconic cards is the Gear 2 event manga. Obviously, the Gear 2 manga is, I think, the second most expensive of the non-red or gold manga cards, because I think Gear 2 is an incredibly iconic pose. I also think they absolutely nailed it with the artwork on this one. The smoke looks amazing. The background, the contrast, the foiling, looks absolutely incredible. So this is one of my favorite looking cards they've ever printed. And I think that if you really, really wish that you had the Year 2 manga like I do, this is as close as you can get to that at a much more affordable price point. And so I think that this is going to be an absolutely iconic card moving forward. For me, at least, Gear 2 is almost as iconic as Gear 5. And so for that reason, I think they belong in, basically the same category. By the same logic, though, we also have the Gum Gum Giant event manga, which I think checks all the same boxes that I was just saying about the Gear 2 manga, except it being Gear 5. I'm going to slide it one spot ahead of the Gear 2 because a lot of people, people typically prefer the Gear 5 form to the Gear 2 form, even though Gear 2 is actually my personal favorite. Next up, we have the Luffy from PRB02. This, again, is one of my favorite cards that they've ever printed. To me, when I look at this card, it's just straight Gum Gum Gatling to the face, which I think is a pretty cool, viewing point for the card. I was lucky enough to pull this card, and just the way the foiling looks is absolutely spectacular. It's one of my favorite cards that I've ever seen. So obviously I'm biased because I have it and I've seen it in person, but to me, I think this is going to stand the test of time as one of the most iconic Luffy cards. I think Gum Gum Gatling is iconic, and I think this just captures him mid-battle so incredibly well. Next up, we have the Luffy Dodger promo card. This is another one that I think is going to be viewed as an absolute iconic card 5 years from now. There's a few reasons for that. Number one, the image was drawn by Oda for this card, which I think makes it stand out as cool. I think the fact that it's a crossover to a really popular sports franchise is really cool. I think the fact that One Piece has shown that they're going to do more crossovers, that they have done more crossovers, whether it's with soccer or college basketball, they're likely to do more of those things moving forward. But I think this is going to be sort of like the first major sports franchise that they've done this with. So I think this will end up being the most iconic card of that category. I also think the fact that there are quite a lot of these cards out there actually helps it to be more iconic because more people are familiar with the card. And so for that reason, I think this belongs quite high on the list, and I'm putting it in fourth place for now. Next up, we have the Ace Error Wanted card. This one is really only on the list because of the error. I think that, otherwise, it's a fine card. It's a wanted poster, which is cool. I don't think it'd be in the top 30, but I think because it's an error, people will be more familiar with the card, and I think it will be more desired in the future. And it's sort of an important piece of One Piece history for that reason. Next up, we have the OP13 Luffy wanted poster. So this may be a controversial opinion, but I actually don't like this card all that much. I strongly prefer the OP03 to this one, mostly because the OP03 came first. If this card came first, I would like it better. But the fact that it uses the same image as the OP03, and except that it's in black and white, to me just sort of says, yeah, we realized we could have made the OP03 one better, so we're just going to print that card now. But for me, that just makes it more lackluster. Next up, we have the OP13 Luffy SP. This card is absolutely awesome. The foiling on these cards are amazing. So while it's not, I think, as iconic of an image of Luffy, I do think it's a really cool card. So it deserves to be in the top 30, but I'm not putting it near the top of the list. Next up, we have the OP14 Boa SP, which again, as I was saying about the OP09 Boa SP, to me, these two are fairly fungible in where they land. I actually slightly prefer the art in the OP14, but again, to me, I think it's just a matter of opinion and a complete toss-up which you prefer, but I'm going to put the two of them next to each other. And then finally, for our last card, we have the OP14 Zoro. I absolutely love this card. I think this card is truly iconic. I think Zoro's face is absolutely hilarious and perfectly captures him. I love Sanji in the background. I love the bubbles and like the perfect capturing of the light from Sabaody. So I think it's like a really, really amazing card. And I think this is going to be one of the top SPs 5 years from now. I do think it's still a tiny bit expensive right now, and I'm hoping that it goes down because I would like to get one. But I can't disagree. I do think this is going to be an incredibly iconic card moving forward. Okay, so that's the last card we had, and it appears that I have not gotten the number of cards in each tier exactly right. So let me quickly go through and see which ones I missed. I think we probably just need to bump everything up by one. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we have it, a top 30. So I know people are going to disagree with this. That's totally fine. Please hit me up in the comments and tell me where you disagree. I love learning other people's opinions on these things. This is entirely subjective. I'm not saying this is how it's going to be in the future. This is just my opinion. But I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope this was a fun video for you as well and that you got something out of it. I do think thinking about the future of where these cards might go can help us to understand where we might be able to find value in the present. If we think that something is going to grow in popularity over time and become more iconic, capturing it before it reaches that iconic status may be a way to gain a lot of good value. So with that, if you're enjoying the content, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate you checking it out, and we'll see you in the next one.